Hi, everyone. Again, David Pickeral. Nice to meet everyone here today. It's been a great day. I've been here since the doors opened. It's been a really fun day. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of really, I guess, around innovation in terms of how we go from the digital to physical world, or physical to digital and back. That's certainly the venue for this could not be more appropriate in terms of New York City, which we'll talk about extensively from our own experience. As it happens, there's a major anniversary that everyone should be aware of as far as urban mobility, which is what I do. 115 years ago, on October 27th, right at the end of this block, literally, the IRT, what was then called the Interborough Rapid Transit No. 1 line, opened in New York, going from, as they said in the day, City Hall to Harlem in 15 minutes. And it revolutionized. We talk about disruption as a 21st century concept, but it completely, almost overnight, changed the life in New York City, where you had people going basically on Manhattan for 50 or 100 years before that. Nothing really moved more than 2 or 3 miles an hour, whether it was horse-drawn, people walking, moving from 2 to 3 miles an hour. All of a sudden, you were going to 40 miles an hour. We think of the Hyperloop as fast. The quantum change in speed of mobility that took place here 150 years ago in Manhattan absolutely changed the life of the city. People almost couldn't conceive of something that could go that fast. They were used to trains and steam trains going really fast out there, but the idea that something would hurtle under the streets of Manhattan at 40 miles an hour was an incredible concept. And essentially, New York has been putting one incredible concept after another in developing things. Some of it, as we'll talk about, are really plans that are going to be replicable around the world. And I used to be IBM's smart transportation leader, among other things. I'll talk about my background in a second. There's things that can be common and replicated all over the world, and then there's things that are only going to be distinct to New York City, or to Los Angeles, or to Peoria, Illinois, or to a small town. And it's kind of that choice of things. But we're going to talk about today some of the choices and options that New York as a city and as a region has here. So we'll go my right to left with a couple of introductions from everybody in terms of talk. We've already heard our names and our backgrounds, a little bit what we're doing. Again, as mentioned, I'm the chief business officer and one of the 3 co-founders of a company called Parkofon. And despite the parking name, which we've kind of outgrown already, it's a mobility solutions company that really focuses on highly accurate location-based technology in vehicles. One of our major collaborators are various vehicle OEMs and fleet owners to basically know where every vehicle is at any time, manage space availability for that vehicle individually and as part of a fleet or as part of an enterprise so that you can park it, and eventually as congestion charging takes hold, as I think it will across the United States and it certainly will in New York, or as you have various different tolling and charging schemes or e-payment schemes, your vehicle will be able to figure out where you need to go, park here, drive here, and all payments will be taken care of in the back, so it won't be all these different tags and tolls and things that people do now. So that's kind of what we do. Personal background, I don't like to go too much into my bio. The one thing I will mention is, since it's almost Veterans Day, I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, and I actually got my free basketball today. I also happen to have gone to the current NCAA basketball champion and lacrosse championship, the University of Virginia, go Wahoos. So to all of you fellow Wahoos out there and everybody else, good luck this year in basketball. Most of our team graduated or went to the NBA, so we'll see how we work out. So with that, I'll pass it on to Josh to give his introduction.
Thank you. This is wonderful to be here. I love this backdrop, and this is a great event. Really appreciate the Marketplace Live folks for organizing it and getting to share the stage with this panel. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the City of New York. My main focus is the city's broadband strategy. There are about 1/3 of households in New York that do not have broadband at home, but really for connectivity in New York, you have to have a mobile and a home connection, given people commuting to jobs, being out and about, as well as having to do homework, apply for jobs, look at health information in a private environment. And only 60% of the city has that level of connectivity. So that means about almost 3.5 million New Yorkers are not connected or underconnected, which is basically almost the 2nd largest city in the country. So trying to marshal everything we have in the city and all the wonderful assets, many different providers, large and small, infrastructure providers, and maybe we'll get into some of that. But marshal that to make sure that there's connectivity in the basic infrastructure everywhere, because that's really the foundation for all of the smart city innovations and next generation technologies that are going to transform almost every industry in the city. And for all New Yorkers to participate in that and contribute to that, and contribute to be continue to be the drivers of the value and intelligence in those systems, we really need to make sure that all New Yorkers are connected. So that's the main focus, and we'll be talking about that and many other aspects of our work later on.
Thank you, David, Marketplace Live, and it's an honor to be here with the esteemed panelists. My name is Rhonda Binda, and I'm a technology lawyer by trade, but I've had the pleasure of working in the intersection of government and technology for the past 20 years. And first, starting at the national level, working at the White House, and then working globally with governors and mayors at the US Department of State. And about 6 years ago, I returned back to New York and managed my local neighborhood, Jamaica, Queens, implemented a 3T strategy around technology, transportation, and tourism. And I hope to get to talk to you a little bit more about that today. And since then, I've started a consultancy working with mayors and governors on building their smart city strategies. And in addition, we're working also on the federal level, and we created a Smart Cities Caucus with Congressman Issa last year and Congresswoman Clark. We also ran an infrastructure challenge that was, we received participation from about 250 governments around the United States. And back now doing global work, I just returned from Slovakia on a smart cities tour there. So I'm very passionate about leveraging technology to improve communities and best practices and sharing what we're learning across the country and across the world with each other. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Rhonda. My name is Jason Elliott. I'm the 5G Global Market Development Manager at Nokia, so I talk to our service provider customers around the world and also non-telco audiences about 5G technology. So a little bit about Nokia. We're a 150-year-old company, started in 1865 in Finland, and we've gone from making kind of paper to rubber boots and tires all the way through to the communications industry. Obviously, you probably know originally from the mobile phone brand. We don't make mobile devices anymore. We're the largest infrastructure supplier of telecoms equipment in the world. We're the only global supplier of 5G end-to-end network solutions in the world. And we're now the new home of Bell Labs, the renowned research institution. And if you travel about 25 miles west of here into New Jersey, that's the headquarters of Bell Labs, where you'll see how we're building the Future X network, which is the vision of the future of the network and how we're going to change humanity in the future. So really delighted to be here with everybody on stage today. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now, we kind of can do this two ways. As typically, I make this thread all the time when I do speaking around the world. We have a bunch of questions, and they're quite good questions. And I can start out with the questions if people are comfortable with that. But my ideal preference for any conference, particularly one with a bunch of industry practitioners like this or like yourselves, is I would kind of like to start off right off the bat with people asking questions and get interactive right away and have a dynamic session before we go in there. So I'm going to first open it up to anybody who's got a question or something that you'd like to have us discuss, having gone through our backgrounds just now, and would want to raise as a question. And if we can do that the whole session, I'll be very happy with that. I think we have people with mics here. Does anybody want to step up? I can't see too well with the lights in my eyes, so I can't see. No questions?
Why don't you warm us up? Yeah.
I'm going to have to warm us up. I'm going to do the warm-up. Okay. Here comes the thing. Hopefully I remembered my reading glasses. I'm going to get to the question of this one. I mean, essentially, this is a question I have dealt with for decades and decades, literally since I was in government at the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority and across IBM and across Booz Allen. What really is a smart city? And before we go into our definition of that, I give my definition of that. I'd like everyone to go through and kind of what they think is a smart city. Is smart city, I'll throw out the kind of modification of the question, is smart city even really a valid term? It's a term that, frankly, a couple of people in the marketing department invented a few years ago. Kind of a clever term, but what does it really mean? And assuming it means anything, what is it? So let me go, I'll go left to right again, and I'll start jumping around more. So go ahead, Josh.
Well, I think smart cities is really, the reason why the phrase is smart cities is because the companies that started that phrase knew that the customer was the city. So there's no real reason, first of all, why being smart happens at a city level. I think, Rhonda, as you've been leading on, it's a regional question. A lot of planning issues happen on a regional level, and being smart also can happen on a regional level. On the other hand, for a city as large as New York, neighborhoods have their own character and intelligence, and there really needs to be smart strategies and solutions tailored to the neighborhood scale. So I'll just add that to start, that I think even just limiting ourselves to cities in that question is, already out of the gate undermines the real value of the conversation.
Thank you. I 100% agree with you. And I would say that a smart and connected community or a smart city or region is one that leverages technology and innovation to improve the delivery of government services, to make them more efficient, more effective, more transparent, and even can anticipate the needs of the citizens. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, you're right, it's about creating better places to live, work, visit, to play. And we've spent a few years looking at what are those pillars. And what we've realized is that if you have a foundation that's trying to achieve 100% connectivity, like we are in New York, 100% mobility, and looking at resiliency and trying to grapple with the cybersecurity, physical security, and sustainability issues under the resiliency pillar, and of course looking at future of work. If you're looking at those 4 elements, you are definitely moving towards achieving a smart and connected city or community.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to reiterate that point, the connectivity piece being really key, so that you can build these digital platforms at scale, so that you're really connecting the people to the services that the city offers. And again, the challenges to be addressed of moving people, goods, and services in throughout our communities and getting them to be able to into kind of like different types of opportunities. I think that's, it's definitely more than the city itself. It's about creating the smart communities of people to kind of really further the opportunities that are available for everybody.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, I remember there used to be a lot of talk about having a sort of like a city operating system, almost this idea that you could, have everything would be one software platform. And I think we've understood now that it not only will be, but should be a much more diverse ecosystem of solutions and technologies and a network of networks. And the challenge, I think, on the neighborhood or city or regional side is how do you plan that? How do you have all those moving parts and different competing interests and different companies orient towards a strategy, a coherent strategy? That's one of the things that for New York, why we've been focusing on an IoT strategy, a public Wi-Fi strategy, and an internet master plan that starts to mobilize all these private sector projects in partnership with government towards some shared framework.
This is good. I'll kind of kick out. I mean, I've thought about this. I think my personal favorite definition I come up with, I don't plan to speak for Parkofon or anybody else. About 7 years ago, again, when I was at IBM leading the Global Smart Transportation Initiative and fairly new to the job, I was in Singapore and was basically asked this question is how do you define it? On Singaporean television, basically, at this conference, how do you define smart transportation? It was not a question I hadn't planned to be asked, and I kind of came up with an off-the-cuff answer that I've kind of adopted over the last several years, and I really haven't found, in my view, a better definition because it doesn't really go to a specific city or region, and it really has to go, I think, as a foundation. We can't afford to rebuild everything every few years. I mean, for example, the IRT has been there for 115 years. No one's going to go build another new subway line. There was an era when New York was building subway lines left and right. There were 2 private lines in LaGuardia's third line fighting over who was going to be there, and basically, in the end, the city took them all over and kind of governmentized them, to use the reverse word. And they're here, and we have to, obviously there was a new subway built recently in New York. Most of the major infrastructure can't be built all that quickly, so how do you use data to optimize it? And how do you use data? There are not gonna be fewer cars on the road. One of the biggest fallacies I hear is that the car ownership is declining and there are fewer cars on the road. It's actually literally not true, because they've come up with the stats. People buy cars, when people are in students and young professionals in the city, yes, they don't tend to buy cars, particularly in New York. When they decide to move out to Long Island or Jersey when they get older and find a partner, yes, they do tend to buy them. They just do them later in life. So there's going to be life. So they're going to be still a lot of cars on the road, still a lot of people that need to use transit because they need to have it for jobs or social, particularly in New York. So all that infrastructure is going to exist. How do we as network and connectivity and data professionals optimize that? And I think it's answered at the level of every city and region of how you make it smart, using the resources that are going to be there and are going to continue to be there, but how do you make them smarter rather than, well, we'll just replace everything. Singapore and Dubai can do that. Nobody else can do that.
One of the interesting things is I think we tend to take connectivity for granted, and it's even in like dense urban areas like New York, right? And I know you've done a lot of work already, kind of in different areas of New York to kind of like promote the fact of the to increase connectivity, and I think that's really, really important. So because right now we take that for granted, and until we really have that ubiquitous level of connectivity, or that minimum level of connectivity, to realize and build the platforms on top of that, is we can't do that until we have that basic level of connectivity. Until you give that connectivity to the individuals that need it so that they can access those services, that's just a fundamental requirement that we really have to do. And I agree, it's a multi-pronged strategy because there's different types of technologies out there. We do see the eventual evolution towards 5G, being able to support like all these different types of services at massive scale in the future. We have good broadband, fairly good broadband connectivity now, with existing 4G services and other types of access services as well. But I think when we really look at this, doing this at what we call a massive scale, that's really where 5G will come into play over the longer term. And understanding that level of connectivity and being able to do that at the right cost point as well is key in terms of the scale. That's the direction we need to move in the future.
And I think there's an important in there about concurrency, because the thing of 5G, I think, is going to be different than any other, because every other time, and I worked for Bell Atlantic back in the day when they were deploying first generation PCS 20 plus years ago. And now 5G is going to deploy, but I'm very focused on rural connectivity as well as urban. 4G LTE is going to continue to build out in areas that never had it before, just as 5G serves the dense urban corridors that need 5G for a start. So there's going to be a parallel rather than sequential development, I think.
Even in cities, we're seeing 4G densification is going to have years ahead of us, while 5G is just beginning to roll out, even in urban areas.
Yeah, I've worked with tower companies and backhaul companies, and 4G is going to continue to go like this, but 5G is going to do this, and I think my prediction is going to.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that kind of gave actually, Rhonda, I wanted to see if you had something to add in there.
Well, I'll just add one thought. We talked about technology and the financing and the policies around it, but I think at the core of all of it is really the public-private partnership, which you've also talked on, the business working with government, working with universities, and working with the community and the stakeholders in the community. And so I think, to your point about if we make the right decisions earlier and sooner, and put the strategy together the right way with all the players at the table, we'll be able to save time and money later on. And so the connectivity is a big part of that as well, because how can you connect with so many different stakeholders? You have to use technology for that. But I would say that at the core of this, and I think that what's been successful about the communities that I'm working with that are moving forward, they're putting the P3 at the core of their strategy.
That's great. This you guys have kind of also already set it up for our next, I call it the follow-on question. And it's kind of a loaded question, and it's one I really I want the audience to kick in on their point of view here, because a lot of the audience is from New York. I think everybody except me is now from New York, right? I've been up here a lot of times. I'm actually from Washington, D.C. I'm actually a former lawyer from Washington, D.C., but a lot of things. Rode up on the train. The train line, if anybody's ever ridden the train from Washington, D.C., another historical note, basically is basically the same as it was 85 years ago when my dad was born. They electrified the line from New York to Washington. The Pennsylvania Railroad did it in 1935, and it really hasn't changed in 85 years. And if you ride Amtrak like I do a lot, you know that that's kind of getting really old. I'm sorry for the digression, but so really I'd like to hear from both my colleagues on the stage as well as in the audience. What do you think the priority should be for cities generally if you come from somewhere else, your city, or New York specifically in terms of what you've seen here since many of you work here? Oh, go ahead, good. I think there's a mic coming.
It's working this time? Perfect. I guess, first of all, the last point was really interesting in terms of talking about connectivity in rural areas versus more dense populations. I don't know if everyone on the panel is familiar with Hassan Minhaj's Patriot Act, but he did an episode on Comcast and public policy and how the FCC were okay with their monopoly on rural areas. So less the politics of the question, but more about the policy of the question. The reason that's happening is because some of these more rural governments have no option but to play ball with an entity like that. So again, the semantics of that are here, but how does that play into smart cities? Because it's all good to say New York or Chicago or London and having Wi-Fi routers that know what you're going to eat for breakfast there, and that's amazing. But the utility of a smart city is to increase the efficacy of the government that runs it and help the citizens who live there live their lives. If that's blocked by policy because of economics, that's a problem. So again, I'm not asking you to give me a thesis on all this stuff, but it's more, is the thing that moves that forward reducing the economic incentive system or increasing the policy levers?
Okay, let's let you guys kind of tackle that.
Do you want to get into that?
That was a lesson.
Sure. So David, I just wanted to mention that I'm a recovering lawyer from Washington, and Amtrak, I'm assuming you're, was one of our clients for many years, and we have a lot of work to do on that end, and so I do feel your pain on that. But in regard to your question, it's a little echo here, so hopefully I heard you right. I think that we're taking creative approaches because 5G will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Will that be passed on to mobile consumers? Will it be passed on to, so we're not sure exactly how we're gonna pay for it, right? And for any of these improvements. But at the base level, I mean, we keep coming back to, I really think that connectivity at this point, if you believe education is a human right, it's a human right. And everyone should be able to have access in this day and age, at least in this country, I believe. And we have to be more creative about the way we're, and the speed that we're looking at deploying these, deploying old and new technology to make sure that we reach connectivity to everyone. And so there are creative ways that we're doing at the business level district, looking at advertising and matching that and encouraging small businesses to, in exchange perhaps for someone's email address, which they can use to send coupons or special invitations for special events, that they would then be able to provide connectivity. So this is at the commercial level. At the residential level, I think that's probably more your question, but I was really shocked when I moved back to New York to learn that in my district that had over 600 businesses, there was no broadband. And so at the same time that we implemented the 3T strategy, we also started a campaign around digital literacy for upward mobility and economic development. And so when we did eventually, because of the strategy, win the funding from the city and from the state for downtown revitalization, 40% of those funds actually went to that digital, closing the digital divide in downtown. So from what I understand, it's a few years now, they're still working on it, but at least now we were able to find a creative way to bring funds. But this is a challenge, of course. And another reason why I think it's important to use public-private partnerships, because sometimes if you sit at the table with your private sector or the university, they'll see the benefit overall for the community and will be willing to help the government in closing that gap.
Yeah, I would also.
We got you next, by the way.
So, and I would just add that some of the policies, whether it's state preemption of local governments building out their own networks, which isn't the case in New York, or federal attempts at preemption of local authority, those cut directly against the opportunity to do any kind of partnership, because you're trying to take government, out of the equation, and that's just, I think that's just foolhardy. I think that, in New York, we have a lot of potential partners, and we're really blessed to have, just such a vibrant economy and lots of partners we can work with here. But anytime you're trying to take government just out of the equation, I think you're going about it the wrong way.
This gentleman will be next. If someone can pass the mic down to him, and I'm going to make one quick comment while he's getting the mic. I've worked in industry and government and heavily with academia. You're not going to do it without all three. There's certain things. Government has a fundamental responsibility that it has to execute, but it doesn't always have the speed and resources. I worked for WMATA, the Transit Authority in Washington, 25 years ago. And I've also worked for the federal government as well as the Navy. And I've worked for a couple of Fortune 500 corporations, and right now I've run startups. It's going to take all the talent of all of these types of organizations, along with the research that academia has been doing, combining it. Industry, government, academia have to work together. Anytime we go off in a separate direction, like some of these unicorns that are now losing billions and billions of dollars, you're going to have a problem. Likewise, if government starts to pilot something by itself, and it doesn't have the funding and resources to support it, it'll be no more than just that, a pilot, a one-off that goes away. So anyway, now let me let you add your.
Thank you. I'm Joe Plotkin with Stealth Communications. We're a fiber business provider here in New York City. I have an example of infrastructure that we have here in New York City that, in talking to a number of cities and towns across the country and telecom providers there, they don't seem to have, and that's our conduit system. We have a shared conduit system under Manhattan that allows all of us fiber providers to use collectively together. And consequently, in the business world, on the business side at least, there is a robust competition for services here in New York for gigabit speed and internet point-to-point and so on. Does New York City use that as a competitive advantage in luring other businesses here? And how can we start to talk about it as a model for other towns? Lincoln, Nebraska is an example where they're starting to build out conduits and even dark fiber and leasing that out rather than becoming the ISP themselves. So I thought we sort of started that model.
Yeah, so the arrangement that Joe's referring to, and thanks for bringing that up, Joe, is predates the subway system. So from the, I think 1891 may have been when that contract was signed. It was incredibly, forward-thinking in terms of what it laid the ground for. It addressed the fact that in Lower Manhattan before that, every single competitor's wires were being strung on poles in competition with each other. And if you look at the pictures, you would not believe that the sky was just filled with wires. And it was not only unsightly, it was unsafe. And in a snowstorm, a lot of that came down and clogged the streets. So this conduit system was put in place, and this common carriage system for conduit. But it was for the New York City of the time, so it's really Manhattan and the Bronx. So we have a lot of competitive advantages. That's, I think, one of them. What we put forward really is, the people of New York. But one of the challenges is that because this city is, put together through different jurisdictions, because it's put together through different jurisdictions, not sure what happened there, but you have a different patterns of infrastructure deployment now coming out of that system. Brooke, want to turn it on now? Does this work? Did everything go out? Are you on?
Let me see. We're dark and quiet.
Well, the point just being, I'll finish the point while we get that resolved. The point being that we have all this legacy infrastructure built under these different conditions, and now what we really have to do is make sure that we have a coherent infrastructure across the entire city. So just because you're not in Empire City subway territory doesn't mean you don't have the same world-class competitive, multi-gigabit capable infrastructure that Lower Manhattan has access to.
That's good. There was another gentleman, I think, right here that had a question. let's see if we can, I think we're going to have to yell and then I'll get you next, I guess. Okay. Oh, well, go ahead.
Alex McCaskey, retailer AI company. How do you prioritize the responsiveness that you get from all of these diverse systems? New York is so huge, you get so much feedback. How do you kind of go about setting up your machine of ranking things so that the overall infrastructure is responding to these times?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but maybe you want to speak to that in a more general way?
I can
Okay.
generally speak.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's a great question. We're working with NIST on setting principles and, actually looking at the ethics of how these systems need to interact among and between each other. I think it's a great question, and I'm sorry, maybe you were.
No, I was asking you.
So
Yeah.
I really think that we need people like you who are thinking about this, because we are still, I think, at the nascent stages of what we're going to see with AI and how these systems will be working with each other. I think that there does need to be leadership somewhere, whether it's from the engineers or from another one of these multi-stakeholder groups that come together and start to set rules around it. Because I do think that 50 years from now it's going to be very different than today, and without setting out some principles today, both on the technical side and the ethical side, we may not want the results that we'll get in the direction that we're currently moving.
Yeah,
Quick administrative comment.
Yeah.
It does not look like we're going to get the mics back anytime soon. So if folks there's a lot of space in the center and front. If you can't hear, use a low-tech solution, move up and in, and you can hear us better. We'll talk as loud as we can, but we need a
Oh, cool. That's great.
DIY fix or something.
And of course, I'm also specifically concerned with the security of these systems and the risks that come along with it. And this is another reason why it's so urgent that we need to understand this a little bit better. And I think we need to get ahead of this problem.
Yeah, so from the Nokia perspective, we're doing a lot of work in AI machine learning. So from our perspective, it's as you start to build these massive networks, the complexity increases. So we're using machine learning to automate a lot of the operations of the network to reduce that complexity, so that reduces human error. But like any AI machine learning system, right, you have to be very conscious of the bias that you build into that system because it's a human programming it. So a lot of the points have already been made earlier in the sessions as well, that you need, particularly the folks from the BBC Research Lab talked about how humans and the robotic algorithm processes need to work together. That will continue for a long, long period of time. There is only certain sets of algorithms and things where you can apply machine learning effectively. And you're absolutely right, we do need to think about policy and regulation where it's going to affect us as individuals in determining like what we choose or what we do. But initially, a lot of it's going to be kind of automating back-end systems really so that we can scale everything. And we continue to be part of like a lot of the open industry forums, so we provide a lot of open APIs and connectivity to different types of platforms. And it actually goes beyond security now. So if you think about it, it's more about building digital trust. And security is one thing. Security is like, knowing you have brakes on the bike and when you're going to pull them that something's going to happen. Trust is a completely different thing. Trust is making sure that everybody else is going to use their brakes on the bike at the right point in time so that you don't have an accident. And I think that as you start to move beyond pure security discussions, because we can do that. We have lots of tools in the toolkit to be able to do that. But once you build trust and you build the right trust model, then you start to get people being able to use the technologies they want to do in the most effective manner, because now you're actually building, if we're having a relationship in a business transaction sense, when you look at it, once you've built that trust, you have the security, you built the trust, and then you can really kind of make a big difference in the way you offer services in the future. So I think connectivity is one piece, security, but digital trust is the thing that we should focus on first and foremost going forward in the future.
And I think one other thing to keep in mind is that for a city government or for all these different components of infrastructure, the governance frameworks are actually not one and the same. You know, if you're talking about the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, that's one governance system. You know, if you're talking about bridge and tunnels, that might be a different one. City streets, that might be a different one. You know, broadband is something that, you know, in a lot of ways we're preempted by federal government, and we can't necessarily dictate the priorities of all the different private companies that are here making their business decisions, even though that is an essential infrastructure and undergirds all of the connectivity and intelligence you might want to weave into your system. So it's not just the digital trust, it's also somehow having a way that your democratic functions of governance actually have to work for you to take part in that. And then the second part of that is the participation of your residents, your constituents, the people who are the people in that process. So it's understanding how those systems work and being able to have a functioning system of governance that allows for participation at.
Yay! Technology, wonderful.
I'm still glad to see you all so much closer. That has a functioning system of governance that allows actually for the participation in the decision-making process so that you have people democratically setting the principles and frameworks that then guide political governance, engineering decisions, whatever you want to do on the, using automated systems. If you don't have that good governance with human, everybody participating, then that's not going to work ultimately to the benefit.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
I would also refer you to, thank you for reminding me about this, that the Department of Defense last week put out, I think, a 10-point principle, this overall, and you perhaps take a look at that as a framework.
And just generally starting with principles, just articulating principles, are really, I think, at the heart of good partnerships. So that's a key point.
That's good. And I think, there's a couple of questions. The gentleman on the aisle has had your hand up for a long time. And then I want to go, there's a couple of questions I want to reach from this list because I want to make sure we touch on them. So if you could ask as briefly as possible because we're running out of time, and then I'll see if I can get back to you as well.
I'm Jack Rao. I've been the chairman of the jurors for the Intelligent Community Forum for about 10 years. It's mainly for Rhonda. The question is, what is the difference between smart city, smart region, as opposed to intelligent community, which we use? If you want, I can explain what Intelligent Community Forum is, but if you do know that, I'll shorten my question, otherwise I'll give a brief explanation of what Intelligent Community Forum is.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what the
Yeah, very briefly. ICF, or Intelligent Community Forum, is a New York City-based think tank which annually evaluates hundreds of communities all over the world in terms of how they use broadband technology, knowledgeable workforce, innovation, sustainability, advocacy, and one special theme every year, education, health, or whatever. Okay. And evaluates communities and announces at the summit Intelligent Community of the Year. Mm-hmm. So
that's great. I don't think there's that much of a difference, it sounds like. I mean, we're organized around similar pillars, the connectivity, mobility, resilience, and future of work. It sounds very similar. Of course, we keep coming back to the core of this discussion is around the connectivity, which is I think, the foundation. I don't think there's that much of a difference, and there's not a one-size-fits-all for communities. So yep. It depends also at where, you have to take an audit and assess where various communities are, and they seem to, right now there are hundreds of organizations around the world that are all working in the same direction. Some of them are surviving, some of them are consolidating, and I think, as long as we can even look for more partnerships among these groups to reduce some of the inefficiencies, I think we'll get there faster.
Yep.
The question is, should we collaborate together? Should we?
Yes, Yeah, I would love to. I would love to.
In terms of the community, we should all have a single interface rather than multiple.
And so that's one thing we're looking at doing actually with the Smart Regions Initiative. Because of the infrastructure challenge, we have a sense of what's happening around the country. Obviously not everywhere, not even New York is like a country in its own in some respects. But we do want to look at who can be the repository. So working again with NIST, and I don't know if you're familiar with GCTC, Global Cities Teams Connect. Next year, they're focusing on smart regions, and let's see, and really what we're doing is looking to build a digital platform. So we can share this information. Let's use technology for this sharing of best practices and connect the project planners with the governments, with the financing arms, so we can accelerate the process.
Yep. And I don't want to
de-risk the process.
Oh, sorry. And we're kind of getting to some esoteric questions here. What I would suggest, because we're down to about the 4 or 5 minute mark, there's a little bit more ground I want to cover to make sure that digital realty gets covered here. Again, there's a reception afterwards. Everyone can please be down there. We'll be here on the stage for I think a few minutes afterwards. All of us are on LinkedIn, and at least I am in the app. I think some of us are in the app. So please take this opportunity to send us a link. We won't get a chance to cover everything here. Send all of us, I think I can say, a LinkedIn invitation or a note, or use our contact details in the app if it's in there, and ask specific questions, because it's a lot to cram in. There's one point I want to make sure to raise in terms of digital realty and in terms of those guys being our host and convener here. For those that don't know, they're going to come out with the Digital Capitals New York City report. One of the stats from the report is that by 2024, the annual value of IoT, blockchain, and 5G will be $25.6 billion, increasing by 130% from the $11.5 billion currently generated in the New York economy in 2019, with the largest component being from AI. I'd like to get impressions from my colleagues in terms of how AI, IoT, 5G, analytics, which is what my company does a lot of, IoT and analytics to actually eliminate infrastructure. How do you all predict that'll predict in? And to the extent we have left time from the audience, get a few comments from the audience about that, and then we can take it to the cocktail hour, I believe, at that point.
Yeah, so putting all those things together, I mean, this kind of 2020 timeframe is really, really interesting. So when you think about the evolution of cellular-based technologies, they pretty much happen every decade. It's pretty on a cycle. And as we see, obviously, 5G is already being deployed here in the United States. We've already deployed with the 4 major carriers here in the US. But the combination of all those technologies, IoT and AI and blockchain, coming together with the deployment of 5G and access technologies will kind of allow us to really give us much more insightful data at massive scale. And so that we can start to automate everything that we see and everything that we touch, and really start to bridge the physical and digital worlds together to create a much more connected society at large. That's the power of all of these technologies together, and this is why this 2020 to 2022 timeframe is extremely important, and we're going to see a huge sea change going forward because of all those technologies converging together. And for us, we provide not only the access technology, but obviously the compute platforms as well, and all the digital value platforms on top of that as well. So not just the connectivity piece, but being able to look at the whole stack and understand how you implement those technologies and deploy them is really key. And then working and collaborating, I think, is very, very important, because we have the technology, we have the toolkit there to be able to do these things, but collaborating is going to be key to the successful deployment and use of these technologies to better our smart cities and our environment in the future.
Yeah, I think that that the exciting things that we're seeing right now and the amount of data that we're able to collect because of these 4 technologies will lead to more evidence-based policy making. And I think we do have to, again, step back. How we want to share data, but what are the rules around that? Who benefits? Who owns it? Is it the city? Is it the individual? Is it the company? Is it a shared system? And then how do you define that trust? So it's happening quickly, and I really think now is the time for us to come together and figure out how do we deal with these sort of externalities that may come out of it, and look at it as an opportunity to extract value from it, but not just value for the government or the private sector. Let's see how we can also involve the community and universities in those discussions, because I do think that universities will play a much bigger role, because they're the only ones, I think, that, at least in this country, we tend to trust private sector more than government, as opposed to working in some countries and around the world. But universities can be at the middle of that and be a neutral place for not only for training and and applying learning and training the next generation of technologists, and we need so many more engineers and people, especially in certain areas like cybersecurity and STEM training. But if we can figure out these collaboration partnerships, I do think that we want to see universities at the center of that going forward.
We got our blinking red lights, so we're going to do kind of the wrap. Josh,
and the next decade, it really is going to be critical, because those technologies are really going to layer together to have an incredible acceleration of the digital economy. And it's great to see New York being recognized as a leader and being so well positioned. But the critical things are really, how do we ensure that all New Yorkers can participate and benefit from that? And that's a question of equity. It's also the New York's biggest opportunity, because the people who live here are the biggest driver of why this is the place that companies want to be, why we all want to, why those of us who live here just love the city so much, and making sure that all New Yorkers are participating in that, and that this incredible acceleration that's going to happen in the next 10 years doesn't just bring 60% of our city or 30% or 1% much further ahead, and so entrench that gap that we can't ever overcome it. So now is really the critical time to put in place the partnerships that Rhonda was talking about, to make sure that all this change and all this development over the next 10 years happens equitably. And I just want to acknowledge that some of those partnerships that we have in place that are great models are things like New York Media Lab that does bring together academia and partnerships to make sure that we have startups and use cases for these new technologies here. Economic Development Corporation is doing a Center for Responsible AI for the city, so that's in the works. And did a blockchain big apps competition to try and continue to generate public interest use cases. And we have an academic, industry, community, government collaboration around an innovation zone in Harlem called the Cosmos Wireless Research Testbed. That's going to be the place where we're introducing not just 5G, but the innovations that ultimately will go into 6G through that collaboration. So I think those are the things that New York City is doing now, along with our plans for universal broadband, to make sure that the city stays at the lead of the digital economy around the world, and make sure that all New Yorkers participate in that.
And with that, we've run out of time, but I want to, as we get to the end of the day, as well, head into the cocktail hour, again, look for us at the reception, social media, our various channels, not just the guys, people are up here now, but everybody there. And also, I'll make a last plug too, download the app if you haven't already. I've actually seen the app not utilized that much, which is kind of surprising for a tech conference that people aren't using the app as much. But download the app. Our details are on the app, and you can connect with us through the app as well. If you keep the app on your phone for a day or so after you do it, or reach out to it. And I want to thank Digital Realty and all of our sponsors here. For having everybody here today. It's been a great discussion, and the dialogue has only just started, so we can have it after that thing. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.